as the streaming here all afternoon. Did you enjoy Mr. Bennett, Bill Bennett? Great guy. Wow. What a wealth of knowledge. Powerful, powerful man. And, of course, tonight, 710 KNUS's Hugh Hewitt will be joining us. I hope you'll be here for that about 7:30. And the reason I bring up those two specifically is because I'm Steve Kelly with 710 KNUS, and it's good to be here from Kelly and Company. That's right. Now you can see why I'm on the radio, okay? I have the face for radio. But I was thinking about this as I was coming here. I mean, the conservative camp, this is where we do, seriously, to use the metaphor of a fire, to throw logs on the fire, while our state is literally on fire. And I'll talk about that in just a few moments and introduce our guest, who will then introduce Senator Coburn, who's here, and his new book, The Debt Bomb. We just had the senator on last week. Just an incredible, you're in for a treat here. Think about what happened, though. As I was thinking about this week, are you exhausted or are you exhilarated, I wonder? Are you? I mean, you think about this. Last week, ladies and gentlemen, Arizona had a border. And I'm not being facetious. Albeit porous, Arizona had a border last week. And this President Barack Obama, not only won't defend Arizona, and you heard Governor Jan Brewer here yesterday, he not only won't defend it, but he's gone on the offensive with the Department of Justice, a hotline if you have any trouble getting into the country, by the way, illegally. Call the hotline. That was last week. Also last week, and you heard the senator talking about it, and Bill Bennett and everybody else talking about the Supreme Court. Last week, you saw the largest tax increase on free people in the history of humanity. The largest tax increase. Okay? So the government now can penalize or tax us into forcing us into buying something that we don't want. That happened last week. On top of that, a sitting United States Attorney General found in contempt of Congress for lying, for stonewalling and not releasing all these documents. That happened just in 1 week. And on top of all that, we here in Colorado saw 346 homes burnt to the ground in Colorado Springs, 257 up north in the High Park fire. While this president came in full campaign mode, by the way, yesterday, and I begged him on the radio yesterday, you may have heard it, please don't land, just fly over, don't land. And he said, oh, thank you. But he said, he did land anyway, apparently he wasn't listening to me, but in full campaign mode, using this opportunity, I hate to say it, folks, but as a photo op. And he said on top of that, and I don't know if you caught this, he said, they've been doing an outstanding job. And truthfully, those fighting the fires have been doing an outstanding job, and they deserve our applause here right now. But on a federal level, an outstanding job, while no less than 5 C-130 tankers, retrofitted, ready to fight the fires, sat. It's not outstanding. They were out sitting on a tarmac. And this president and the governor didn't get them in. How many homes could we have saved if we would have just acted? No, this is not an outstanding federal government. It's an overwhelming and oppressive federal government. We're seeing it, and that's why we are here today, and I so thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to introduce a gentleman who, by the National Journal, for the last 3 years in a row, has the most conservative voting record. He's just gone through a primary competition that he survived successfully, but in all soberness, in all somberness, I mean, it's his district, District 5 right now, that people continue to lose their belongings, and we're losing forest land, the 5th Congressional District in the state of Colorado. This man I've had a chance to talk to and have become friends with, and you've heard him on the radio show a few times, and he's going to talk not only about the fires, but he has the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker this afternoon to kick this off. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Congressman Doug Lamborn. Doug?
Thank you, Steve. And John Andrews told me to say just a few words about what's happening in Washington and down in the district. Steve also alluded to that, so I'll do that briefly and then proceed with the great introduction that I'm so honored to be able to give you today, Senator Tom Coburn. But like Steve was saying, this has been an overwhelming week in a lot of ways. Back in Washington, I voted, among with many others, to hold Eric Holder in contempt of Congress. We also had the discouraging decision on the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And like someone said, under Nancy Pelosi, Congress created this mess, so Congress is going to have to fix this mess. And we're going to do that if we can take the Senate in January. It'll also help if we have the White House, then the bill won't get vetoed. But we with a literal 50-51 vote margin, we can repeal Obamacare. And that'll be our first order of business. So that was going on, and then these fires. There are now 1,300 firefighters from around the country working in Colorado Springs, El Paso County, the Pike National Forest. Unfortunately, when the 65-mile-an-hour winds started up Tuesday afternoon, it got beyond their lines of containment and came into the city limits, right on the edge of the forest, where there are some beautiful neighborhoods. And as Steve said, 346 homes were destroyed, and we know of 2 people who have died. So our hearts go out to the families of those who have suffered loss, both living, the lives lost, and the property lost. I was talking to a gentleman last night, a great friend who lost his house, and a lifetime of memories went up in smoke. And dealing with everyday things now, how do you pick up the mail when you don't have a house? You know, there's so many things that are now they're going to have to just start all over. So please keep them in your thoughts and prayers. And then, as Steve also mentioned, I had a primary election on Tuesday night. I won at 61 to 38%. Against an opponent who claimed to be a conservative, but he was trying to remove the most conservative guy in Congress. I don't know what that was about. He spent $700,000 to $800,000 of his own money, I think, just trying to buy a seat in Congress. But the people of Colorado are not that easily swayed. They need to be persuaded. They're engaged. They're intelligent. And I know many of you, if not the bulk of you here today, are from Colorado and other states as well. So you just can't do that. So I'm really happy that came out so well. But it's been an overwhelming week. And so that's the latest, John. And John Andrews is such a great guy. I served with him in the state Senate back in the early 2000s. He was the Senate president at the time, and we worked together on some good things. I was the chairman of the State Affairs Committee, the so-called killer committee, to either pass bills or kill bills as the case needed. And we had a lot of fun times doing that, didn't we, John? Okay, well, anyway, it is now my real honor to introduce one of the real stalwarts in the U.S. Senate. I'm honored to be here. Senator Tom Coburn is the person I'm privileged to introduce now. He and his wife, Carolyn, have a great history in Oklahoma for all the accomplishments in their lives. Of course, one of the greatest would be their 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Outside of that, Mr. Coburn and his wife are both graduates of Oklahoma State University, and I'm sure along with T. Boone Pickens, they want to see a national championship come their way. Senator Coburn has a track record of a lot of wins in other areas. These wins would be found with his family, faith, business. Formerly, he was in the U.S. House, then the Senate, and as a medical doctor. He's a man of integrity. People know that he is a man of his word. When he says he's going to do something, he does it. When he pledged he was going to be in the House for 6 years, he lived up to that term limits pledge. And I think he was the only Republican to ever hold the seat up till that time in the previously Democratic 2nd District of Oklahoma. And then he was elected, as we know, to a term in the U.S. Senate and was reelected. Currently, he's on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, and the Committee on Finance. He is a leader in the fight to uphold the true meaning of marriage, the dignity of human life by protecting the unborn, Second Amendment rights, and incorporating responsible fiscal policy. Outside of standing up for these important values, he has a great business track record. When he was the manufacturing manager for ophthalmic, correct me on that, Senator, when you get up here, division of Coburn Optical Industries, his company grew from 13 to 350 employees, and he's personally delivered 4,000 babies. But most of all, Senator Coburn is known as a true conservative. Last year, the National Journal ranked him as the most conservative senator. His opposition to excess spending and more debt is well known. His commitment to smaller government is well known. And his objections to those who propose government as the solution for any and all problems has earned him the title of Dr. No. Let's clap on that one. He is a staunch conservative who wants to stand on principle while finding real solutions to the problems we face. I hope to hear proposals of how conservatives in Congress and we here in the public can go forward as we go forward now into the next years. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to present to you Senator and Dr. Tom Coburn.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Have a seat. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. I think it's entirely unfair. I'm going to get rid of this so somebody doesn't hit me with it. I think it's unfair to have to follow Bill Bennett. But I do have a lesson for him, and it's a true story. And he closed thinking about how we select Supreme Court nominees versus how the liberals do. And I have a story for you that would relate to that. It's a story about a father putting his daughter to bed. And he gives her a drink of water, tucks her in, says her prayers, and he goes back into his bedroom. And about 5 minutes later, she says, "Daddy, I need a drink of water." And he said, "Darling, you just had one. You're just trying to stay awake. Go on and go to sleep." About 10 minutes pass, and "Daddy, I need a drink of water." "Hon, now we've had this discussion. If you don't go to sleep, I'm going to have to discipline you. Please go on and go to sleep." So about 5 minutes pass, and she says, "Daddy, when you come to spank me, would you bring me a glass of water?" Well, there's a moral to that story, and she was willing to sacrifice for what she believed in, even if it meant a spanking. And that's one of the rare qualities that America was built on, and yet we don't see displayed too often today. I'm going to speak for a short period of time. I always get a big speech, and then I always get off of it and don't stick with it. And my best forte is to go back and forth with you all for questions, so I'm going to allow most of the time to be about questions. But it is a sincere honor to be with you. Conservatism isn't just best, it's right. It's right for everything that ails us. It is a great solution in terms of how we combine what we know to be true by sacrificing some of ourselves as we interact with other people. And that couldn't be more important than in our elected leaders today. And that's why I'm an avid believer in term limits. It gives you the freedom to do what you know is right, regardless of the political consequences. And that's why you send us there. Not to do what's good for us, but to do what is good for our country. The problem in Washington isn't that Washington can't agree. The problem in Washington is they agree too well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a $1.4 trillion deficit this year. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend out of every dollar we spend, we wouldn't be borrowing 33 cents from the Chinese. The problem is counter to what you hear in the national media in terms of us not being able to get along. And going back to what Bill Bennett said, and what a hero of mine he is. What a stalwart. What an intellectual giant that he has been and mentor for many of us in terms of not only understanding what our founders believed, but also giving us the courage to stand on it. We have great threats to our existence today as a nation. And I would think, in my opinion, greater than any threat we've ever faced, whether it's been our Civil War or Revolutionary War, whether it's been World War II, whether it's been the Depression. And that threat, it comes to us because we've spent the last 30 years in this country spending money that we did not have on things we did not absolutely need, and the bill is due. If you look at generally accepted accounting principles, our government has liabilities in excess of $131 trillion. And nobody can put their hands around what $1 trillion is. And it's not just my word you should take for it. As Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mullins said, the greatest threat to America is not China. It's not Islamic radical fundamentalism. It's not Russia. It is our debt. And the painful thing for me every week in Washington is to know that and to know it's true, and yet not see the political class in our country address the very real problems in front of us. And there's a great lesson for it. I write about it in a book called The Debt Bomb that was just issued this April, where we see the natural tension for career politicians to put their career and what's in the best interest of their career ahead of what is in the best interest of our nation. Sooner rather than later, there will come a point in time when the confidence in our country by those who are loaning us money will erode. We won't be able to control that time. But one thing we know is that when it comes, it will come quickly. It's a scary thought. We see Greece, we see Europe, you saw this week Spain and Italy. And you see problems of debt, deleveraging, for which they have no answer. And then we see what happened this week in terms of the security of the United States, in terms of our own finances. And what you realize is we're the best looking horse in the glue factory. We're the only rosebud that isn't starting to wilt. And so the comfort that we're experiencing today is really based on a relative comfort, based on how the world is viewed everywhere else but here. Europe's troubles will give us a reprieve, but they won't solve our problems. That's why leadership is so important. And let me step aside for a minute. All the Republican candidates in the primary I knew. I knew them well, from Newt Gingrich to Ron Paul to Tim Pawlenty to Rick Santorum. And as a conservative, I endorsed Mitt Romney. And as a physician, I want to tell you why. The problem in our country isn't that we don't have solutions. The problem in our country is that we don't have leadership, bold leadership that will teach and talk to the American public as adults and then lead on those principles. And if you go look at the life of Mitt Romney, at every juncture, at every intersection, at every challenge in his life and in his professional career, he has demonstrated the qualities of leadership that I want for my children and grandchildren. It- and I would just have you contrast that with what we have today in the White House. The other thing I would have you think about in terms of the problems in front of us is the contrast of where we are, like a college student that has 5 credit cards and now is trying to get the 6th one to be able to pay the interest on the other 5. And guess what? The credit card isn't going to be available to us. Solving the financial problems of our country, our debt and deficit, is paramount for us having a vibrant economy. And not doing anything is not an answer. Not doing anything is a tax increase on everyone in this country. But more importantly, and I want you to see this the way I see it. I do town hall meetings that have anywhere from 800 to 1,500 people, all the way down to 50. When I ask seniors, are you willing to do hard things for your children and grandchildren that would renew the American growth and excitement and vibrancy? Every time they tell me yes. But just so you'll have a picture of what it means if we don't, I want you to think about every 8-year-old and below in this country shackled both at the ankles and at the wrists for their entire life. Because what we're about to do in this country under this president's leadership, or lack thereof, is to create an environment where their opportunity, their standard of living, and their liberty will be so constrained that they will never taste what we have known in terms of what is known as America. So I'm dedicated my time and my life in Washington for the next 4 years to make sure that doesn't happen to your grandchildren and does not happen to mine. We have no problems in front of us that are insolvable. What we have is a problem with a career status quo that thinks about the next election and places its priority in their own political career ahead of what is in the best interest of this country. Our founders understood that. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's not talked about much but was written about a lot at the founding was called the term rotation. Only one of our significant founders didn't want to use rotation, i.e. term limits, as part of our founding documents. And they really didn't think it was very important because back then, who in the world would want to spend their life in Washington? And the same today, you have to ask that question. Who would want to spend their life in Washington? No one should. No one should. So where we see the problem, as we saw this week with the Supreme Court, is what our founders intended. They talked about a balance of power between branches. But the greatest balance of power that they talked about was the balance of power of us holding the government accountable, all 3 branches. And that's why this election and what can happen with this election will be seen as either the beginning of a renewal of the American spirit or the acceptance that we will go the way of every other republic. Let it not be so. Let it not be so. How do we fix it? It's not hard. We have to be honest with ourselves about where we are. We've made promises that will never be kept. In no way can they be kept. So the adult conversation needs to be had is what are the problems and what are the possible solutions? And the first thing is to get our country going again economically. And if any of you will recall the Reagan years, you will recall a 4.5-year span where we had actual real GDP growth of 4.9%. 2.5 times what we're seeing today, creating 10 to 15 million jobs a year. Why was that? That's because they reformed the tax code. They took the abnormal incentives out of the tax code and they replaced it with the incentives that capital will flow where capital will be rewarded. So broadening the base and lowering the rates will change what is lacking today, which is confidence and certainty. Second thing, entitlement programs. You know, my staff just finished working up 59% of American households get over $2,500 a year from the federal government. Let me repeat that. 59% of American households get over $2,500 a year from the federal government. Are we past the tipping point? I don't think we are. And the reason I don't think we are is because of the history of who we are. America has done hard things. America knows how to do hard things. Hard things are going to be required of us to solve the debt and deficit problems in front of us. What is lacking is courageous moral leadership to send us in the direction that we need to go. The final thing we need to do is to quit sending $300 billion a year out of this country for energy. I had a debate with that very popular and renowned economist, Paul Krugman, who wants to have another $800 billion borrowed and another $800 billion stimulus. There's now $2.6 trillion sitting on corporate balance sheets. That's about 1.7 to 1.8 trillion more than normal. And it's sitting there because there's no confidence or certainty about the future. The best way to have that money invested is to create expectations and confidence about the future through our tax code, through our energy, and through our refinement of our entitlement programs. We can keep commitments to seniors, but we have to change how we do that. And that requires rigorous leadership. But it also requires honesty and an apolitical answer when the political questions are asked. And I would put forward to you the stance that we can't ever have a tax increase puts us in a place where we're going to guarantee there's going to be a tax increase in this country, because it's called financial repression. And when all of a sudden your 401k or your IRA or your son-in-law or your daughter graduating from college can't get a job, and the value of that IRA and that 401k can purchase a third of what it could before, that's a tax increase. And that's what governments do by printing money like we're seeing the Federal Reserve do today. Because ultimately, the price for printing that money will come back with a decline in the purchasing power of everything you have. It is the worst tax on everybody in this country, and it's called inflation. And it will be with us. It will come screaming out of thin air, and it will punish us like no other method of taxation. So we should resist that, and we should do what we need to do to solve the problems in front of our country. I'll close with this. There's only 2 areas in our country where we do not let markets work. As Americans, we've proven to the world that a free enterprise system, although not perfect, causes markets to allocate resources better than any other method. We spend $2.75 trillion a year on health care. And we know $850 billion of it is wasted. $1 in $3 does nothing to help anybody get well and does nothing to help anybody prevent anybody from becoming sick. The answer is to reconnect payment with purchase in health care. And the Affordable Care Act goes just exactly the opposite of that. And then finally, the other area where we don't trust markets is education. We spent $2.7 trillion since 1970, and there's no parameter of education measured in this country that is better, and many are worse. If, in fact, you want something to become affordable, you can guarantee if you ask the government to do that, it will make it more expensive. And that's exactly what's happened to college education and education across this country. I would leave you with the thought that this country is on the brink of a new beginning. With our energy reserves, we are going to see a manufacturing renaissance in this country like most of us have never experienced, if we're allowed to utilize it. America has more energy than China, Saudi Arabia, and Canada combined. And yet we're the only country in the world where we as citizens own that energy and our government refuses to allow us to use it. That has to change. 2012 is important. To me, it's a seminal moment for our country. We always hear elections are important. But we've seen the largest, strongest move towards collectivism by this administration that has ever before been seen in this country. And we can see the failure of the Chief Justice, and in my opinion, a failure to fully understand and comprehend the founders' intent of a limited government. And so the balance of power, if we're to change that, it depends on us. It depends on you, we the people. And they counted on us to control Washington rather than Washington to control us. It is time we do it. It is time for us to move. It is time for us to sacrifice in many ways to make sure we accomplish the fact that there is a President Romney, that there is a large majority of Republican, conservative Republican members of the Senate, and that the House is maintained by the Republicans. If you want to save this country. Now, usually with my speeches, I have Prozac pills at the back as you exit. I'm not depressed about our country. I'm worried, I'm anxious, but you can change it. And you do so by demanding the truth, and you do the work to get the transparency to hold us accountable to the very standards, beliefs, and morals that our founders initiated with the founding and birth of this country. I'll take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to see you.
We'll open it up we'll open it up just like we did with, of course, Bill Bennett to Senator Coburn here. I'll take the liberty to ask the first question, and then we've got microphones around here. Senator Coburn, you speak eloquently in your book, The Debt Bomb, about the morality or the immorality of debt. Can you spend 30 seconds and just talk about debt? You talk about moral leadership and the lack thereof. What about the morality of debt?
Well, the morality of debt, corporate debt as a nation, is a form of thievery. And think about it for a minute. When I went to the Senate in 2004, the average individual debt on our national debt was under $30,000. It's at almost $60,000 per man, woman, child. Second point, If you have an adolescent in your household today, when they are my age, if we don't change things, they will owe, not counting interest, in excess of $1 million per person. That's what they'll be responsible for in terms of our accumulated debt and the compounding interest on it. There is a question to ask. I'm doing a big study on disability right now. Is it moral to create dependency in individuals? Or is it a better option to nurture them to earn success and raise the lid so they can achieve their God-given abilities? And if you really look at what we've done with many of our, quote, social welfare programs, is we've taken away opportunity, God's gift to these individuals to excel in many ways as we've undermined personal responsibility in our country. And that's why moral leadership, character-based leadership, is so important for our country in the next few years.
Very good, very good. A follow-up question. Can you buy your book on credit card, sir? No, I'm just kidding about that. That was a very poor joke. Let's go to better questions, and we've got the microphone set up here, so go right ahead.
Thank you, Senator Coburn. My name is Jerry Olo from Erie, Colorado, and I would like to find out how to address progressives who believe that health care is a right. Thank you.
Well, let's expand. If health care is a right, the right for me to have a home is a right. The right for me to own a watch is a right. In other words, what you have to do is carry that on. What is not a right? What our founder said is a right is the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. There was no guarantee that you would have life. There was no guarantee that you would have happiness. There was no guarantee that you would have liberty. But what you were guaranteed was the right to pursue it. There is no question most people in our country feel compassion for those that need our help. Bill Bennett referenced it. We're the most charitable group of citizens of any country anywhere in the world. Matter of fact, we're the most charitable group privately apart from what we do in terms of our own aid. So the question comes, what's next? And that's not our founding principles. The difference is to help somebody means to love them, which means you give of yourself. There can be no compassion in a government program because there's no sacrifice in a government program.
Let's go over here this time, please.
Senator Coburn, thank you so much for your moral leadership. I have a small business question. Another monstrosity that came out of the pre-2010 Congress was the Dodd-Frank bill. That didn't get as much negative publicity as Obamacare, but it's still a big deal. Can you please speak to what you would do in a Romney administration to encourage either a repeal of that law or modification of that law?
Well, let me share with you first Coburn's rule of bureaucracy. Bureaucracies never do what's best for the country or those they serve when they can do what is safe for them. And Dodd-Frank's built on the premise that we can regulate every error, every wrong motive out of the financial system. And you can't. You know, Milton Friedman one time had an interaction with, I'm skipping his name, from Chicago, the radio and TV talk show, Phil Donahue. And he asked him, comparing the free enterprise system to all the other systems, is free enterprise system isn't perfect, but there's nothing that compares with it. And what liberals do to us is they say, see, it didn't work. But they never look at the 98% of it that does work. And when we try to control everything with a bureaucracy and regulation, we can control it. And people will still cheat. People will still get around it. But we have cost opportunity that gets filtered and magnified in an exponential fashion throughout the economy. So what needs to happen is there needs to be transparent regulation in every area that puts our nation at risk. But it needs to be based on common sense, not political drive. It needs to be based on things that actually work rather than things that are theoretical. And number three is it needs to be able to be anticipated. What would the common man? And what is the cost benefit? Because what's happening right now in our banking industry, one of the reasons we're not growing is our small and medium-sized banks are so tied up in knots from both Dodd-Frank and FDIC new rules that we're seeing about 0.5 point a year less in GDP because of it. I would start all over. And I'm on a bill to eliminate Dodd-Frank and start all over.
Let's go over here to the far right. How appropriate? Far right. Go ahead.
Dr. Dave Murray from Denver, in your book, you talk about the careerism not only of our legislators, but those who then move on to the lobbying phase of Washington. What incentive could there be to cause people that we send to Congress to limit their time in office?
Well, that's a great question, but I would put forward a different question. Who you send matters. And if you're sending somebody from the real world, somebody who has hard knocks, failures, skin knuckles, been up and down in life, who actually has an appreciation for life. Do you realize 70% of the Senate, or almost 70% of the Senate, has never had a real job? No, they're wonderful people. They're well-intentioned. I love their personalities. But they lack real-world experience with which to apply critical decision-making processes. How do you think we ended up with 47 job training programs costing $20 billion a year? 82 teacher training programs. 45 programs to teach financial literacy to the rest of us, coming from Washington, if you can imagine that. So the point is, make them sign an affidavit and notarize it. But who you pick, if you pick from the bench, people, then it's a natural tension. If in fact you limit your terms, you can pretty well guarantee it's not going to be about you. If you don't, then what it really says is when it comes down to push versus shove, my political career ends up trumping the best interest of the nation. How do you think we got $16 trillion in debt? Remember when Medicare started? 50% of the cost of Part B was to be borne by Medicare patients. How'd that change? Politicians went out and said, oh, we can lower that, and they lowered it to 35%. They didn't say we're going to have a tax to pay for it. They didn't tax at all. They used it as a method to get themselves reelected rather than do what was in the best interest of the country. And if you wanted to do that, you would create a funding stream to pay for it. So all of us are fallen. All of us have mixed motives. But one of the best ways to clean those motives up is don't send a career politician to Washington, number one. And number two, make them sign a term limits pledge, whether you have, since the Supreme Court says we can't have that without a constitutional convention or voting it through in terms of an amendment, make them sign that pledge. I guarantee you, Ron Johnson, that one of the newest senators who came, who was a businessman, never been in politics, is one of the best senators in the United States Senate. Because he doesn't know what we can't do. He knows what is possible, and he fights for it every day.
Listen, we have time for just one more question. Which one of the four has the best question? Oh, he raised his hand first. I'm going there.
No, he didn't.
He beat you. This is a market question economy here. He beat you. I'm going to go. Okay. And look at this. This is the generosity that we talked about with Bill Bennett. He said, give this gentleman the question. Please, go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Marlon Dorhout. I don't know very much about bonds and high finances and stuff, but I do know that when you keep debt in the family as a whole is better off. And I'm just wondering if we can't find a way to sell U.S. savings bonds and pay off China with those bonds and other countries, and then have the debt in our family where we're paying interest to ourselves. Would that not be better?
It is better, and that's one of the reasons that Japan, with 220% debt to GDP ratio, twice ours, has not experienced significant problems yet. But they will in the next 5 years, because they have a demographic problem that's worse than ours in terms of an aging population. This is the first year Japan will be a net seller in the international market of their bonds. And so if you read the debt bomb, you're going to see where all this is coming together at the same time. History does not allow debt crises to go away without default. We have a chance to save our country and not default. Not have another great terrible depression. We have a chance. But that requires us to think long term and not in a politically expedient way. I would encourage you all, if you're not getting much at the bank or in your IRA, to buy a bond. It does help us, because it puts us less at risk of the selling of the bonds. But when it happens, and I make this point in the book, when the confidence is lost in the America's ability to repay what in 4 years will be $22 trillion, interest rates will skyrocket and bonds will crash. And it's not if, it is when. We will have another debt downgrade within a year in this country, unless you see a Romney Republican leadership in Washington. And the other thing you should be diligent and vigilant about is, if you put us in charge, hold our feet to the fire to do the right, best thing for this country. Thank you. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Senator